Hi everybody, I'm Susan. I'm the education manager here at the Sacramento History Museum. So I want to talk to you a little bit about how some of these traditions that we know today got started. I'm going to have some notes over here because there's a lot of dates because these traditions come from hundreds of years, probably earlier than we think they might, and I want to make sure I get you the correct date, so bear with me. Okay, so I want you to imagine that you have gone back in time about 200 years. It's the year 1820, not 2020, 1820. And I want you to imagine what your house would have looked like at that time and how you maybe would have decorated for Christmas. And maybe it's easier to imagine what isn't at your house. And I'll tell you, there's no Christmas tree at the time. There's no fun twinkle lights either. Sorry, I love Christmas lights too, but they didn't exist at the time, even with candles. There's no stockings hung by your fireplace or wherever you might have your stockings hung. You don't have any Christmas cards that have been sent to you from your friends or family. I'm sorry, they just didn't exist at the time. In fact, a lot of the traditions that we have today or are more familiar with started after the 1820s, so it's pretty recent history if you really think about it. So let's start with one of my favorite stories. We have this one here. It's from my collection at home. It's called The Night Before Christmas. Perhaps you've read it before. It's a poem, and it is written by Clement Moore, and he actually wrote it in 1822 as a story for his family. He never meant it to get out, but a family friend heard it and was like, "Oh, this is amazing. You need to publish this." So he did end up publishing it in 1837. Now, in 1837, this is a really pivotal year for all things Victorian, because it's in fact when Queen Victoria ascended the throne. It's also the year that a prepaid stamp that could adhere to letters was created. So I know you're thinking to yourself, okay, those things are not equal, but actually it's very, very important. The stamp really changed a lot of the way things were communicated in England specifically. Before this, if you sent a letter, it was usually the recipient who had to pay postage, and actually it could get kind of expensive depending on how far the letter was sent, how heavy the letter was. And so by having this prepaid penny stamp, it took all of that out of it. The recipient just got it. It didn't matter how far away it was. And it was known as the penny black stamp. Perhaps you can guess how much this penny cost. Wait, I just gave it away. How much this stamp cost? Yes, okay, it was a penny. But perhaps you can also guess who was on this first stamp. It was Queen Victoria, of course. That's the stamp itself. Now, Queen Victoria became queen at the young age of 18. I actually have a picture here of her coronation. Pretty beautiful. The entire age of her reign was from 1837 to 1901. It's known as the Victorian age or the Victorian era because of just how influential she really was. Anything the queen did, the people really wanted to do too, because if it's good enough for her, it's good enough for me, and we just roll with it, right? So, for example, Queen Victoria wore a white dress to her wedding in 1840 to Albert. And we still wear white dresses today. She was kind of the one who started it all. Now her husband, Albert, was from Germany. He's the one who is kind of given credit for bringing the Christmas tree over to England and then eventually to the United States as well. However, there was actually someone that did it before him. It was the good Queen Charlotte, here's a picture of good Queen Charlotte right here. Nope, that's Queen Victoria. This is good Queen Charlotte. Sorry, you see, they're a little bit fancy. So good Queen Charlotte was the wife of King George II, and she actually set up a Christmas tree back in December of 1800, so 40 some years before Albert ever did. Now I know what you're thinking when you're looking at her. She doesn't look like a person that likes really fancy things, right? Not true, she really did. But she was German, and so she actually brought this tradition over from when she married. So where did this German tradition come from in the first place? Well, there is of course a legend behind it. The legend has that Martin Luther, the religious reformer, he was wandering through a pine forest one winter night and he looked up through the branches of all the fir trees and he just noticed all the stars shining through them and glittering, and he was overcome by how beautiful it was. And so he then went home, brought a tree into his house, decorated it, not with our lights here, but with candles like they had, in order to show his children what it looked like and to be reminded of the stars in the heavens above. So he actually is the one given credit for bringing a tree in and for putting lights or candles on it in the first place. But that was in 1536. So the tradition really grew in Germany, and the Germans were doing it for a lot longer than anywhere else in the world. So when Queen Charlotte finally brought it into 1800, you might ask yourself, why it didn't take off in people's houses then in 1800? But the truth is, it did actually. People did start to bring Christmas trees into their homes after Queen Charlotte did. It was just the really rich people that did it. It wasn't like the everyday people who were bringing Christmas trees into their house. It wasn't until Prince Albert in the 1840s started decorating these trees. And a huge reason why that is because different magazines started publishing pictures of Prince Albert with his family around the Christmas tree. And so then ordinary people could actually see what the Christmas tree looked like. Now, the same can be said that around that same time that the Christmas tree started appearing in the United States. However, it of course was German immigrants that started in the United States with that tradition, brought it over, but it was because it was published in these different magazines that it really took off. So I have here two pictures. They kind of look like the same picture, but they are not in fact totally the same. Okay, let's see if I can hold them here. This one here is the picture that was published in English magazines, and this one here was published in the United States magazines. Can you tell the difference? There's only two. There's two differences. It's kind of a game of I Spy. The first difference is that Albert in the American one does not have a mustache. So apparently, in order to appeal to American audiences, maybe facial hair just wasn't as popular at the time. So they got rid of his mustache, did a little bit of Photoshop on him there. And the second one is, you'll notice Queen Victoria in the American one is not wearing a crown. But she is in the other one. Kind of crazy, huh? So, before we move on to another very influential book that was published during the Victorian era, I wanted to talk about one more tradition briefly that is in The Night Before Christmas, or at least it's first kind of mentioned in there. Well, let's see, so I got my book here. I'll mark it so I can find it. All right. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. See? And they've got stockings kind of like what we have here. Now, I know some of you are probably looking at my stockings and going, oh my gosh, you literally just took those off her feet, I bet. But that's what happened back then for a long time. It isn't until very recently that our beautiful stockings that we do hang by the fireplace with care became a lot more ornate and really just one use, which is at Christmas time. Before that, the stockings were hung and they were just the stockings that you happen to have around your house. But where on earth does that story come from? Why are people hanging up their socks, right? There is, of course, again, another legend behind that. And this legend dates back to the 3rd and 4th century with St. Nicholas, who lived at that time. St. Nicholas was known for his generosity, and the story goes that he heard a story about a gentleman who was widowed, and he could no longer provide for his 3 daughters. And he was too proud, and he wouldn't accept any charity, and so St. Nicholas heard this and was overcome with sadness for this man and decided to help him. But he wanted to do it secretly, so he did it at night instead. And what he did was, at night when everyone was sleeping, he actually, the story goes, threw bags of gold into their open window, and one of them happened to land inside a stocking that was hanging by the fireplace in order to dry. Now, another version of the story doesn't have gold bags, it has gold balls, and that's kind of changed over time, and people put a lot of oranges sometimes in stockings. And so if you look at like icons or images of St. Nicholas, sometimes he's pictured with oranges, and that's kind of the start of that story, is that instead of the gold bags, it was gold balls. And by giving quite generously. I would love to get a gold bag in my stocking. St. Nicholas actually saved this family from ruin. And we still celebrate St. Nicholas Day. Perhaps some of you did yesterday. It was December 6th this year, so that was just yesterday. But over time, this tradition changed from St. Nicholas Day, which was yesterday, to Christmas Day. And I bet you can imagine when about that happened. It was the mid-1800s. It was right around the age of Queen Victoria. So that's why we hang stockings by our fireplace with care. So we've got all sorts of different traditions coming together in this age. Now, if we start talking about the Christmas Carol, this is really when it all started to come together, I guess. Let me find my next picture here. Oh, that's my Christmas tree. All right. So yeah, as you can see, a lot of Christmas traditions started to really take shape during the Victorian era. But there are two more things that I want to mention. The first that was made popular was a different year in our Christmas. We had 1837, which is when that stamp came out, and I'll get back to that stamp and why it's so important. It's also when Queen Victoria became queen. It's also when A Night Before Christmas was published. So the next year we're going to talk about is 1843. In 1843, A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens was published. Now, this tradition that I'm referring to, that we're going to talk about next, it actually predates that by quite a bit. The first time it was in print was in 1699, and it was actually used quite a bit in different songs around Christmas time as well. So perhaps you know what tradition I'm referring to. It's using the phrase, Merry Christmas. Even in The Night Before Christmas, our book here, they didn't say Merry Christmas at the end. They actually say Happy Christmas to all. It's not Merry Christmas until later when Charles Dickens made it popular. So a lot of people don't know that. So A Christmas Carol was written during a sort of time of crisis for Charles Dickens. He was facing a lot of financial hardship despite being a really successful author already. And he was also really aware of the struggles of the working class and the poor in England at the time. So what he wanted to do with A Christmas Carol was to write a story kind of condemning this greed that he saw all around him, and condemning the Scrooges, if you will, of the era. And he obviously achieved this and a lot more by his book, A Christmas Carol. It became hugely popular all over the world. And it really kind of made Christmas a holiday that was celebrated. It eventually actually became a holiday that was recognized. And it really was a time that people started to celebrate, not just like having family gatherings and doing this like in a very big way, but also being very charitable to others. And all of those things kind of existed, but it was really A Christmas Carol that made it really mainstream and very popular at the time. And it also just went outside of Victorian Britain, went to America, went to everywhere, was translated into how many different languages, and it was all because of one book. So it's pretty incredible. Perhaps you still enjoy A Christmas Carol today. I know I have my favorite versions as well. So there is just one more tradition I want to talk about, and it's kind of the one that brings everything all together. It brings that 1837 year, and it brings 1843 all together into one. And it's the tradition of the Christmas card. This here is our museum's Christmas card. We send them out. I'm sending some out from my home as well. So the tradition of the Christmas card in Victorian England starts with a man named Henry Cole, Sir Henry Cole, excuse me. All right. He is said to have sent the very first Christmas card. And what happened, you see, was that in 1837, this new stamp was created. And so what used to be kind of difficult to get letters back and forth, now is really easy because you just pay a penny and you send it and the stamp is already on there. And so Sir Henry Cole was apparently a very popular person, and he found himself inundated with all of these different cards and correspondences. And it was very rude not to reply to all of these letters back then. Maybe that's kind of rude today too. I don't know how you feel about that. But he ended up having almost 1,000 letters that he didn't have time to reply to. And so he said, you know what, I'm just gonna send out end of the year card and just get it all done in one go. I'm gonna spend my 1,000 pennies and we'll just call it a day. So that's what he did. he actually had a card created. It's this one. You can see it there. And he sent it in 1843. And you can also see here that it says, "A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to you." So Merry Christmas was used on this, and that, along with the use of Merry Christmas and in a Christmas Carol, really made people start using Merry Christmas as the phrase. Now this picture here, it's actually kind of funny. He actually got kind of in trouble for it a little bit. It's kind of three parts. There's this main part here that has everybody celebrating. You can see it's a family gathering maybe, or friends. And then on the sides, it's different charitable things. It's feeding the poor, or clothing the poor, you know, very traditional Christmas things. And then he had a to, that's blank, you can just fill in your name, and from, you can fill that in too. But at the time, there was actually a really large temperance movement going on in England, and so he kind of got in trouble for his depiction of everyone being quite jolly at this time of year. But that's okay, he did fine. So yeah, he was the first one that sent out a Christmas card, but he wasn't the first one in the United States. That one actually was a gentleman named Louis Pring, and I've got his first Christmas card here as well. He didn't send it out until 1875. His card, this one, you can see it's quite different from Sir Cole's. It doesn't depict a scene of any sort, but it's a flower. And so it started to kind of broaden what this idea of a Christmas card could really be. And this one is more of the spirit of the season rather than something depicting like a gathering or anything religious too. So he was kind of credited for making what was acceptable with different holiday cards available. So that's pretty good for Louis there. But of course, all these different traditions that we now have, we've got our Christmas trees, we've got our stockings, we've got our favorite stories that have been turned into different media that we can kind of watch and do at this time. And we've got our Christmas cards, and probably a lot more that I just don't have time to talk about today, and I'd love to. But all of these things started from very different traditions all around the world and kind of came together in Victorian England and became what we celebrate today. So it really started to broaden what was acceptable to do, and even you know, the definition of the holidays at this time of season is also expanding. It includes holidays like Hanukkah and Kwanzaa and you know, the winter solstice and other traditions that are celebrated around this time of year. So but it all kind of started in Victorian England, and it's all something great that we get to celebrate still. I hope that you guys can continue to join us every week for our Museum Monday in December, where we'll be talking about a lot of these different traditions that we mentioned today and celebrating this time of year. So I just want to wish everybody happy holidays.